Jews had lived in Antwerp for 800 years, in Belgium for 1100 years. We were all aware of the anti-Semitism. It always surfaced here and there, but the Jews had carved a beautiful life for themselves in Belgium. Beautiful. They were mostly in the diamond business, as was my family. And we had a beautiful life. I don't know how else to tell you. My parents were modern Orthodox Jews. My father didn't have a beard or his tzitzis hanging out. He was a modern. We observed the Sabbath. And every Friday night, the air of happiness and beauty that permeated our home was indescribable. We all put on beautiful clothes to go to the dining room table, and my mother had her finest linens and silver and china set the table for Shabbat, and we had a wonderful meal. And I remember my mother looking at my father with such, how would you say, such contentment. That's the word, contentment. And that soon changed.
There was a day, I suddenly went to the window of my apartment building, which was facing the street, and I saw a big parade and so much going on, and many people were looking out of their windows. And here I see this man in an open limousine. He was Adolf Hitler, inching slowly with an entourage of cars, of other cars, along the avenue with his arm stretched out. And he was beaming by the warm reception of the people on the streets. The crowds below were just in their glory. And I found it fascinating what I saw, but to me at the time it looked like a spectacular parade, which children like to see. I had no idea what was going on. Only later in my life, as I got older and learned about it and heard about it, did I actually realize what an important day in history this was. And it was March 12, 1938, which was the annexation, the Anschluss of Austria, and Austria became a part of Nazi Germany.
I was born in 1934, so I was 6 years old when the war started. And I remember so well, I was laying in my bed and I remember the German soldiers on the cobblestone, marching on the cobblestone, entering Antwerp, where I lived. And I remember my mother and father telling me, because I always asked a lot of questions, telling me that the Germans had invaded Belgium, and King Leopold, who was of German descent, had handed over our country on a silver plate, and not one shot was fired. And so consequently, my parents decided to flee to England. So I'm beginning now, okay? Mm-hmm. And what happened was that we didn't have a car, and my father rented a taxi. And the taxi driver took us towards the North Sea. We took some belongings, I don't know what. And by the time we were halfway to the North Sea, when the taxi driver ran out of gas. And there were no gas stations, of course. So we all got out of the taxi, and we started to walk. The road that we were on were with hundreds of people fleeing and children crying. And the shoulders of the road showed us dead horses, dead people. The Germans were constantly bombarding that road. They didn't want us to flee and to be successful at it. So consequently, it was a nightmare to even walk on this road. And since I was so young, my father and brother carried me most of the time on their shoulders. So we slept in town squares, we slept in hayloft on our road to go to England. What happened was, by the time we got to the coast, we were in Dunkirk, when the time of the fiercest battle occurred in Dunkirk. I, as a child, remember seeing masses of soldiers in the war, trying to save themselves. And then recently I heard where Churchill implored his people, all able men, to take their dinghies, their boats, whatever was navigable, to save their brothers. And the irony is that eventually they were saved. Not one man perished of the British Army. That's how, they were so stoic, the British. And so we were in Dunkirk, and we didn't know what to do. My parents told me later about this. My mother told me later. So what they did were, we made our way into La Panne of France. And what happened was that whenever we got there, the Germans had gotten there first. They had been occupied. So all these cities were occupied. We had no chance of saving ourselves. And one day, my parents met their siblings, who too had fled from Antwerp, because most of the relatives lived, the siblings on my mother's side, on my father's side, all lived in Antwerp and the suburbs. And they too had fled with their families. And my father met his brother, who was a chaplain in the Belgian army, and he said, we are going back. We are living like, nomads, and we cannot save ourselves right here. We heard that conditions are much better in Belgium, and so we are going to go back. And of course, that was our demise. We all went back to Belgium, and in the beginning, things were fine. I was in kindergarten. Life was normal. Until about a couple of months later, a decree went out that every Jew, young and old, had to wear a Jewish star on their sleeve. And they announced that a curfew would be announced, that a curfew was announced that after 7 o'clock at night, you could not go on the streets. Then my father got a letter stating that he was going to be taken to camp. We didn't know about camps in Belgium. Nothing was known. And I said to myself, I was always very inquisitive, as I tell you. I said to myself, why on earth is my father leaving us? Why is that happening? And consequently, he was deported. But the morning of his leaving us, I was still in my bed. It must have been about 7 o'clock in the morning. And he came and kissed me on my forehead. I was afraid to open my eyes, as if I had a premonition I would never see him again. I always had many premonitions. I don't know why. And so we lost. My father left our home.
Many things I know from when we covered the paper of my mother, her marriage certificate, and we went to Poland. The first day, nobody wants to talk with us because we have not enough who we are. I marry in Israel, and then I marry here in in America. My husband died by suicide bomber, so I came to America, and other life. So I have so many paper to show them who I am really. I was born in 38, so 1 year before the war, because my paper from the ghetto is for 40. In the ghetto was a transport. Every transport was the first, the people we went, the old people they sent to the chambers. The second transport was people what they work, they went to work. The third was another transport. The last transport was the children. My father in the evening, he tried to teach me how to walk. He didn't tell me that it's transport. He taught me that it's war and I have to go on his shoes. He has big coat. Evidently he knows somebody. And we live in area, what was Catholic area. Many, was not Jewish area. I don't know if other Jew live, but my father lived there. It was not his apartment, his rental. And we live on second floor. We live in very nice area. And I know now the connection between the people, what I stay with them. When my father brought me there, he told me there are my grandparents. And I was very happy. I went with my grandparents, and he go to war because he's soldier. And they were very nice people, old people, and they behave like grandparents. Now I know why I didn't know my grandparents, because they were religion people. They didn't show in our house because it was not kosher, so never came. And can be in the stroller, my mother brought me to the Jewish area, but can be not so often. So I didn't know my grandparents. This was my grandparents. So the connection, now I know, was a very young priest in Krakow, and this church is not so far from our house where we live. And he went to, I know that he went to ghetto, and he told the Jewish people, look, you want to save the children. And he took many children. Karol Watola, before he was the Pope, he saved many children. Many children. In this church, sent them to other places. He saved many children. Yes, I know that he was the connection. This was the connection. This, when we the first time went to Krakow, we went to the church, and we look around. So when we went, and I went to the church, and I crossed myself, and of course my brother born after the war, he's Israeli, so they stay behind. And come a very old guy, and he say, you are Jewish. I say, how you know? And I speak Polish very well, because my mother speaks Polish only. So he said to me, Carol took care of you. And I say, how you know? Because all the children was here, Jew. But you are Jewish, but you are not Jewish, you are now Catholic. I say, I am Catholic. What I go to tell him? And he say, you know another people? He say, they come Sunday, come again Sunday. And we come Sunday, but people didn't want to talk. After he told them that I am Jewish and we come from Israel, he didn't want to.
My mother's father, Jacob Jagendorf, and we lived together in that apartment building. My grandmother has passed away just a few months earlier. She died during gallbladder surgery. So my grandfather was alone. When we got ready, my mother and my father and I was an only child, to escape Vienna. We wanted to take him along, but he refused to come with us. He believed that this is just a whole lot of commotion and it will pass. So he didn't want to go. Ultimately, in 1941, while we were in China, he was killed on the street by Nazis. And we found that out much, much later after the war. My other grandfather, Moses Schipper, he also somehow lived alone because his wife has passed a long time earlier. I'm named after her. But I hardly really remember my grandparents. And he also wanted to remain in Vienna. And during the war, we didn't know what happened to him, really. After the war, when the lists were shown of the people, what happened to them in Europe, his name was not listed. And so I never knew what really happened to him. Strangely, until last summer, in August, when I was in Europe, I was in Vienna and I visited the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery. I went to the office and inquired about him. And they said, yes, we have a grave here in his name. And they took me to the graveside. So this was the first time I really found out about this grandfather, what happened. And it said he was killed in 1942, but I really didn't know how. But what a discovery after all those years.
My sister, who was 14, one night at 2 o'clock in the morning, she was in her bed in her nightgown. The door, a German soldier knocked at the door and requested that she be down, that Sarah was her name, that she be down in 5 minutes. They had awakened us, the Germans, and then we realized there were trucks on the street, wailing of parents, crying of children. It was like a nightmare. It still reverberates in my ears when I think of it. How they had, that night they had come for all the 14-year-old children, I mean, they were still children, all the 14-year-old girls who lived in Antwerp and the suburbs. So the night, the morning, then came the morning, and who was left? Just myself and my mom. So my mother told me, Blanche, I'm going to go to the Gestapo, and I will request that Sarah be handed back to me for 1 week. I want to strengthen her. She had a bad cold. Just for 1 week, I want her to be returned to me. And I pleaded with her not to go. So I was left all alone in the house. She locked the key and so on. She locked it. And she went to the Gestapo. When she got to the Gestapo, she saw a huge courtyard and hundreds of girls walking in a circle, bewildered, crying. And she saw my sister. And she pointed her out to the Gestapo, and she said to him, please return her to me, just for a couple of days. He took his bayonet to her throat. And he said, you better leave right now, you Jewess, or I will kill you. And she told me when she came home, dripping wet from head to toe, that she remembered all of a sudden she was willing to die. What was her life worth at this point? But then she remembered me. And she had the courage to leave the Gestapo and get to me.
So about 6 months before the end of the war, I was very sick. And they have to put me, I have cough. Children cough, nothing stop. So they put me outside on the stairs, and I sit there. And one from the women came. They have built like housing, like in a village, yes? Mm-hmm. Some woman came and come very close, and she say, "You are not the granddaughter, you have 2 big blue eyes." And I ran home and I say, she talk about my eyes, and hug me and kiss me, and she say, "Everything is okay, don't worry, don't worry." And at night, we slept together, and we have knocked on the door. And she went, because all the village came immediately. He come with translator. Translator stay behind the door. He come, close the door, come. And she already was in a robe, and she didn't know what to talk. But for me, it was the beautiful man what I saw, with all these things. It make on you impression. And I didn't know he's German or he's Polish or he's something. So he came. I didn't know that I am Jew. I never pray other things. I prayed but I pray with her. And I stay in bed, and he opened. He say, kid, small kid, skinny kid. We were all skinny, very skinny. And he didn't know if I am Jewish really or I am not Jewish. And he explained to her many times that he is coming tomorrow. I am coming. I didn't understand what he say, and she didn't understand what he say because he speak German. And he show her that I have not be here anymore, that he has to take me out. And after a couple minutes, she decided that she knows, and she escort him to the door, and he left. She wake my grandfather, and he put me in mattress, and he took me to the partisan. Evidently, his son was there. It was resistant. The partisan was resistant. And it was many men with the gun, with they didn't look like soldier because they have all kind of clothing. And they fight, and he say, "I leave her here." And they didn't want me. They didn't want child. So in the end, he left because he said that he has to be in the morning back. He left the mattress, and he went home, and there was a building. Upstairs was plenty of haze. They put me there in the haze. They covered me in the haze and left me there. I don't know how many days I was there, but I was crying. When the woman picked me up, this was the daughter-in-law, she picked me up, and she said that I am bad girl because I cry and cry. And it was in the middle of the night. She took me, and she took me to Krakow. But she never told me where she's taking me, what she's doing. It's also, everything was like sacred. And she told me, stay up. So it was a letter, but not letter what I know that you go on the letter. It was something with the fire. They put you, you hold, and they put you to the second floor. She closed all the windows. She said, never open it. Never you open it. And in the morning when she get up, she brought me to the restroom, and she closed the restroom. And she left me water and sandwich about this. But of course I was crying. I didn't know, because she never explained to me that downstairs is German living. And she worked every morning. She went. Good, it was only 6 months. And with the time I adjust to that life. Even I enjoy, because I talk to myself, and the day go very quick. But the night was very tough because she used to hold me very strong that I cannot walk. And the day come very, that 6 months pass quick really. because I used to talk to myself and talk and pray and talk to myself and pray and talk to myself. I didn't pray with her in the morning. So when she closed me, she said, "You pray." And in the end, I pray to nothing, but I know, and I sit there on the floor. I was a kid, so, and my father came and picked me up. When I saw my father, I was this happy person, and he say, I want to go to my grandparents. He say, "Your grandparents are dead." This was the end. So I was thinking it was war, and I come to her because they was dead, but he didn't mention these people. He mentioned the other people.
My uncle had left Belgium for, I don't know for how long, and he befriended a Catholic, Roman Catholic priest. And this Roman Catholic priest told my uncle, he was the head of his own church, spiritual leader of his own church, and he said he would like to save as many Jewish people as he could. And by the time my uncle came to Namur, the name of the city, he had already 10, 15 Jews hiding in his own house. So what my uncle did, he told the priest about me, and the priest sent a woman from the Belgian resistance to fetch me. I was told she would be there on a Sunday morning to get me. And I stayed in front of the house with my mother, and she arrived. She spoke mostly French, and I spoke mostly Flemish. But I did know some French, so she communicated with me, and she explained to me that she was taking me to the city of Namur, which was about 2 to 3 hours by train from where we lived. But I had to promise her not to speak to anyone, and not to show my fright, and to hold on to her hand as well as I could. She had taken off my Jewish scarf and my shirt, or whatever it was on, and we proceeded to the station. As soon as we got into the station, we were surrounded by hundreds of soldiers, German soldiers, going to the front and taking the trains there. There were numerous trains. I became so petrified seeing these Germans next to me that I started to shake. And she says, "Blanche, if you listen to me, you have to pretend you're not afraid. You have to pretend." And as we entered the car, we were surrounded by Germans here. I was sitting here, she was sitting next to me. Germans here, soldiers here. Across the way, soldiers here, soldiers here. And I said to myself, how am I going to survive that? I don't know. My little heart started to beat and beat fast and fast, and I don't know how I survived that trip of 2 or 3 hours without saying a word to her and pretending that everything was all right. When we got to Namur, we went to Abbé André, was his name. Abbé is a priest. We went to Abbé André's house, and we were ushered into his parlor, and then he came out. I curtsied to him, and as soon as I saw his face, his eyes, I knew that he was my savior. He had the face of an angel. He was the most gentle human being that I had ever encountered in my young life. And I immediately loved him. And I really placed my faith in him. So the next morning, he told me that I was going to be taken to a large farm, not so large, but a farm, to Mr. and Mrs. Godard's house. And they had 12 children. They were Roman Catholics, of course, but only 9 survived because the infant mortality rate was so high. Because they were a farm and raised chickens, they sold eggs to the farmer, to the people in the village. A little after I got there was a big castle in the background where the farm was. The SS decided to take over the castle and inhabit it. Well, that was bad news enough for the Goddards, because their life was on the line as much as mine. And one day, we heard motorcycles approaching the farm, and 2 Germans came in, and as soon as those motorcycles stopped, they pushed me in the cellar under the kitchen, and where apples and potatoes and winter vegetables were kept for winter consumption. And I had to hide myself they had told me, amongst the potatoes, amongst the apples, so that nobody, even if the Germans had decided to go look for someone, they would not detect that I was there. Well, can you imagine being 8 years old and being pushed down a dark cellar and told, go and hide, you have 2 minutes to do that. And then, while I was hiding, I could hear the boots of the soldiers cracking on the wooden floor above me, because it was not such a well-constructed house, whatever. That was so frightening.
My father was taken to a concentration camp during Kristallnacht, which happened later that year, but I was not in Vienna at the time. I was taken to Switzerland by my uncle where I lived, so which left my mother alone. And he was held in concentration camp Dachau and Buchenwald for 9 months. And he wrote letters and postcards to my mother at the time, which was censored, he couldn't write everything, and he begged her to please go to any kind of consulate in the city and to try to get us out of Europe, because if you have proof, they would release me from concentration camp that we're going to leave Austria. She tried and could not accomplish anything until she heard either from the Jewish agency, or I don't really know, that she was told that the only country that will accept Jews at this time is China, because all the other countries don't let you in, not even America. But you could go to Shanghai without any documentation, visas or papers. They would accept you. So my uncle in Switzerland purchased sailing tickets for us. You needed money to go on the ship to China, and he purchased 3 tickets. So with these tickets, my mother traveled to Berlin, to the Nazi headquarters, and showed them that we have tickets to leave Europe to China. So, upon showing those tickets, proof of sailing tickets, the Nazis released my father from the concentration camps. This was after 9 months. At the time, I was in Switzerland. And these tickets, but they told us that we had to leave Europe within the next 2 weeks. Okay, so they went back together to Vienna, picked up a few necessary items for the trip to Shanghai. But where was I? I was not with them, right? So I lived 1 year with my family in Switzerland. And I was a little girl of 4 or so, and my uncle packed up a little suitcase for me, and a tag was hung around my chest with my name and my destination. The ship was leaving from Marseille, France, and I lived in Montreux, Switzerland. So on it, it said that I am to get off at Lyon in France, where my parents will meet me on the platform. All right, so this was all written on my tag. He took me to the train station, and there was a lady on the platform. She was going to Paris. And he approached her and he said, "Would you please look after this little girl? She's traveling by herself, and make sure that she gets off in Lyon," which was a few hours train ride. And she said, "Sure." Okay, so to me I was very excited. This adventure I was frightened. On the other hand, I was excited to go on a train ride. So we arrived in Lyon. The train stopped a few minutes and I got off. And I was standing on the platform, a little girl. I spoke only French at the time. I had lost my language of German. And all of a sudden I see my parents walking towards me. I didn't see them for 1 year. I recognized my mother, but my father I didn't recognize. He was so thin and so different, right? So we hugged and we embraced, and we had to get to know each other again, right? I didn't speak their language. We couldn't converse. So we went together, the three of us, to Marseille. And we went on that ocean liner for 30 days. We traveled all over the world, around Africa, and made many stops, but we could not get out. During that journey, we got to know each other more. We could talk to each other more. I became more used to them again. And finally, in June 1938, we arrived in Shanghai, China. Well, it was an awful sight. The harbor was full of Chinese beggars, and it was a poor and smelly city. It was very disappointing. But anyway, the Jewish joint was waiting for us, and as we get off the boat, they took us on their trucks to a refugee camp.
The immediate family members that are lost in the war were, of course, my father, my brother, my father Bernard, my brother Leo, my sister Sarah, and my mother and I survived. Just my mother and I. And of course, countless and countless of cousins and uncles and aunts that I can't even count. My family was really decimated.
So I saw light here. So I came here to the synagogue and was Havdalah. And people danced in this. I started to cry. I never saw it in my life. 79B, and not to know that this exists even. I was mad on myself. And I cried. The rabbi came and asked me, "I can help you." I say, "No, you cannot help you. I am so happy that I came. I never saw this kind of things. I know I come to the synagogue from time to time, but this brought me here. I know it comes me back to really Judaism. Now I feel that I am Jewish.
To escape the horrors of Nazism is one thing, but to survive is another. Now in my later years, as I hear the stories of so many other survivors, I learn of more tragedies. I hope that the future generations, our children and grandchildren, will carry on and tell our stories so that the Holocaust will never be forgotten.